Okay, welcome back, everybody. I'm Jesse Weber, and you're joining us a great time here on the Law and Crime Network because we are live right now in day 2 of the penalty phase in the Scott Nelson trial. And you're joining us at a good time because a new witness just took the stand, Dr. Mark Rubino. He's a neurologist. This comes after the last expert who just testified for quite some time, and he was on the stand for a while, a neuropsychologist, all trying to understand what's going on with the defendant? What mental issues, cognitive issues was he suffering? Because at the end of the day, this jury has a big decision. This jury found this man guilty of the kidnapping and brutal murder of Jennifer Fulford. Now they have to determine what will his punishment be. The death penalty's on the table, so all of these kinds of witnesses to talk about his upbringing or his mental state, it all comes into play. Now, he's qualifying himself right now, which gives us a good opportunity to talk about something else that happened in this trial. And if you haven't heard about this, wait till you hear about this. So there is a juror who had to be excused for inappropriate comments that he made. Apparently, on the eve of stepping into day 1 of this penalty phase, he made up his mind already and said, hey, I don't think this is going to last too long. I don't think the state has enough evidence to go forward with this death penalty. Not a good thing for a juror to say. Wait till you hear what happened when the judge questioned him. Well, you don't see that every day, a juror being excused like this. I mean, Rachel, have you seen something like this? It's pretty bad to hear a juror already make up their mind so early in the case.
Yeah, and it was pretty blatant that he knew what the rules were, and he obviously knew he shouldn't be discussing this case. I don't think it's probably that rare that a juror's made up their mind, but to publicly tell others when they have been told they can't, that's a real issue.
But let alone in this case, because I don't know, when we first heard him testify,
right,
a part of me said to me, okay, the jury's going to come back in 15 minutes with the decision on the guilt phase. Here, I mean, that didn't happen. They deliberated for quite some time.
We were all shocked waiting here. We literally thought, they went into deliberations in the morning. We literally thought it would be like 3 hours, 3 minutes,
right,
and they would be back, and it was hours and hours and hours we were waiting. So I don't know what they got hung up on. Obviously, they were discussing something. I do find it surprising that they don't think that this is necessarily a death penalty, or this juror didn't think that this case warranted the death penalty, considering the brutality and randomness of the crime is so horrific.
And him taking the stand and being so callous and cold with his words.
Horrible.
I think maybe they'll deliberate a long time on this. We're not there yet. Okay, so on the stand is the next defense witness, this neurologist. Let's see what his findings had to say. All right, so what can we gain from this? That the defendant, according to this witness, has an impairment. He has an impairment. Smashing your head a bunch of times is not a normal thing to do. Him getting in the car and getting drunk and crashing. If you're sitting on this jury, Rachel, what are you taking from this?
Well, listen, this always, usually I should say, happens during the death penalty phase of a case like this, where the defense puts on a parade of expert witnesses, basically testifying to the fact that he has all these sort of mental issues that may have caused his judgment to be impaired. And I think the jurors have to weigh the totality of what he has been convicted of doing, weigh that against what these experts are saying that these impairments that he may have, and say, you know, does that outweigh, overcome what I'm hearing here? So I don't think it necessarily, unless one of these witnesses comes out with something super shocking, I'm not sure it really has that much of an impact either way.
And that makes sense, because when we're talking about this, it's the aggravating circumstances. Do they outweigh the mitigating circumstances? And when you're a defense attorney, really anything could be a mitigating factor. I mean, they have broad discretion about what to throw out there for the jury to consider. The question I keep asking is the defendant himself going to take the stand during this penalty phase and tie it all up once more like we heard during the trial phase?
Well, the question, I think the defendant wants to take the stand, and he's probably urging his defense attorneys to let him do so. The question is, can his defense attorneys convince him the damage done during his testimony during the first part of the case was so bad, he is only going to hurt himself by taking the stand in the penalty phase? Then the other question is, maybe he does want death. And maybe he wants to take the stand to guarantee that death sentence.
I want to break that down with you, because there's an alternate argument that him taking the stand might have helped him. I'll let everybody think about
Really?
that. Yeah.
Jesse, I'm shocked.
I'm going to talk about that after this. Let's jump back. We're going to take a break. When we jump back, we'll talk more about this, but we have a lot more to analyze. Welcome back, everybody. Dr. Mark Rubino, a neurologist, is on the stand right now in the penalty phase in the Scott Nelson trial. This is the death penalty case. The defense is trying to do whatever they can to literally save the life of their client. And so far today, they've brought out people that know the defendant very well, talk about his childhood. We've also seen from psychologists, a neuropsychologist, a neurologist, talking about any impairments on the part of the defendant. And this witness right here is talking about a significant impairment of brain activity for the defendant. He even said it's possible there is a delay in his brain activity. This is all something the jury should consider before rendering their decision on what the penalty should be for the murder of Jennifer Fulford. Let's go back live and we'll hear more from this defense witness. Okay, so Rachel, I want to break this down with you, if I'm understanding correctly, as we learn more about the deficits and really severe issues that this man might have had. The idea is, jury, he's responsible, he's blameworthy, he's culpable for the death of this woman, but he's not so responsible to be executed. How should I be thinking about this if I'm sitting on the
they're
jury?
talking about his history of these brain injuries, concussions, and basically trying to say, you know what, this guy, who gets put to death? Someone that's pure evil. And here they're trying to explain how he came to be this way. And they're trying to say it's because of all these issues. It's not like he was born evil. Whether it's going to work for the jurors, I don't know. If this first juror who we just talked about that got dismissed is an indication of how the other jurors feel about the case, and he may very well be, then I think absolutely the prosecution is going to have a tough time getting a death sentence.
Yeah,
in this case.
that juror was saying, look, if this was a guy who killed multiple people, had a past of murdering 1 million people, then clearly that would be somebody who'd be put to death. Here it's a different scenario. The reason, just to bring back something I mentioned earlier, we talk about whether or not this man right here is going to go back, take the stand during this penalty phase. I thought it might be in his interest to do so, because when he took the stand in the trial phase, we're looking at it from one sense, man, this guy is evil. But then when it went to the jury deliberations, they deliberated for quite some time. And one of the issues was whether or not he actually premeditated on this. Did he intend to kill Jennifer Fulford? And he said on the stand, no, I didn't. So I'm curious what happens if he takes the stand now.
Yeah, and they were, of course, fresh off of hearing that testimony when they went into those deliberations to consider whether or not they wanted to convict him of the premeditated aspect. They did ultimately. So that's an interesting theory, Jesse, that perhaps it could even help him, because in a way, he's so not attached with reality and seems so maniacal that perhaps it could help him. But at the same time, I gotta say, from listening to his testimony, I kind of disagree with that. I thought he seemed pure evil. I thought he seemed like he almost could have done this before, the way he was talking about it. So I don't know.
Well, luckily you and I are not sitting on that jury to make the decision. Not an easy question in any case, let alone this one. Let's go back. Again, this neurologist is on the stand. All right, this is an interesting line of testimony, learning more about the things that this man suffered, that they're saying that he had impulse control problems. These concussions are a serious factor to consider for this jury. So we're just getting into this right now. Interesting day so far. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to hear more from this witness and we'll break it all down. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back, everybody. We're live right now in the Scott Nelson penalty phase, day 2. A neurologist is on the stand. Gave some pretty interesting testimony under direct about these mental impairments on the part of the defendant, but now, under cross-examination by the state, they're picking apart about some of this. Okay, I'm just being told that there's a recess happening, so Rachel Stockman and I can break this down. The state is having some fun here. They're saying, listen, what exactly your findings are, how are they based off of, and then also, the defendant, you correct me if I'm wrong, are they trying to say he had an opportunity to get help and did it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, one thing that came out during cross, and our viewers unfortunately missed it because we were in a commercial break, but you and I were listening in, was the fact that Nelson, the defendant, wouldn't allow this doctor to do a PET scan or an MRI on his brain, which is really something that neurologists need in order to confirm some of the things he's talking about. I think that was a major mistake by the defense not to bring that out during the direct, and then all of a sudden you have the cross-examination. The prosecution is able to bring that out of the witness, and I think that's pretty damning. Hey, he says all this stuff, yeah, he has these concussions, but he never even allowed me, and I'm hired by the defense, to do an MRI.
Right, and it puts into question exactly, is he a believable person, especially in light of what we saw him testify to?
Maybe he's making this stuff up to the doctor that he got hit over the head a zillion times and crashed into stuff while drunk. Like, I know there's some reports and he can look into the medical history. I'm just saying, I think it's very odd that he wouldn't have allowed his own doctor, this witness called by the defense, to do some of this testing to help his case. And the jurors are going to think that too.
Well, the jurors have a lot to think about with this guy. And I'll tell you what, they were talking so much about Scott Nelson, and rightfully so. But right now, let's go back to the victim, Jennifer Fulford, because during this penalty phase, the state had an opportunity to talk more about who she was and what her death means to a lot of people. So here are some testimony from family and friends. These victim impact statements are heartbreaking. They're absolutely heartbreaking. But Rachel, I guess the question is, how much do they affect the jury's decision on what to do with the defendant here?
Well, first of all, I 100% agree with you. So many of those statements, as I was listening to them live, brought tears to my eyes because they were just so heartfelt. Specifically, her daughter, so well spoken, all of them. In terms of how it impacts jurors, I think it does. Jurors are human, and they're going through an emotional roller coaster themselves, and sitting there listening to these victim impact, these witnesses testify from the family about how it's impacted them, and then having to go and make a decision. I think it does matter.
You know what's interesting about it is, especially the children, is it's one thing to lose a parent to disease or old age or something like that, but to lose a parent because of murder. So someone chose to end the life of this person who was so important to them. I guess the rationale is, why should that person be allowed to live any longer?
Absolutely, and what's so tragic about this case is the fact this woman, this victim, literally did absolutely nothing. She is the definition of an innocent victim in this case. And it's just so sad. It's
incredibly sad, and he said it himself. He never knew her beforehand. She just was at the wrong place at the wrong time. Welcome back, everybody. We're live right now in the Scott Nelson courtroom. Again, this neurologist is still in the stand. He's being questioned by the state. He was a good defense witness in order to show some impairments in the mind of the defendant, especially when you look at his history, apparent history of concussions. And now he's talking about his short-term memory loss. But the state is still picking apart this and trying to maybe suggest that the defendant is making up some of these symptoms. Let's go back live. Okay, so let's break down how good of a witness this was. Now, the reason I ask you this, Rachel, is because he's being questioned about some findings that, are they supported by an MRI? When, if you're going to look at somebody's brain and try to understand what's going on and say they have a concussion, shouldn't you have had some imaging done?
Right, and he did make the point that it's a clinical analysis, meaning that you're looking at symptoms. Of course, everyone's read about how hard concussions are to diagnose. However, in the eyes of the jurors, I don't think it necessarily looks good that he was not able to complete even the testing that is available out there because the defendant himself wouldn't allow him to do it. In addition, you saw the prosecution hammering home this malingering issue, which is faking symptoms, putting that in their mind that perhaps there's some of this that the expert is testifying to could have been faked.
Now, so far they've heard from the prosecution. We've seen victim impact statements. We've seen experts talk about his mental state. We've seen family members of his speak out as well. At the end of the day, this weighing test for the jury to determine the death penalty, what is that exactly? How do they determine this? Because it seems like an impossible decision. And we have about 30 seconds left.
Sure. I mean, obviously, there's the legal way that they decide, right? They weigh the aggravating factors. But then at the end of the day, we've seen this time and time again. Even when jurors will find aggravating factors, sometimes they'll spare a life because they have the option of doing that. They can say, well, you know what? This was really bad. It was heinous. It was cruel. but we're not gonna put him to death.
Tough decision in any case, let alone this one. Rachel Stockman, thanks so much for coming on. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it. All right, everybody. Well, that's it for us here on the network. We're going to be back here at 9 a.m. tomorrow Eastern Standard Time. You're not going to want to miss it. A lot to cover in this case. The Daily Debrief with Aaron Keller is up next. Stay tuned.